Hello and welcome to North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being followed in the upcoming edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined by North Coast Journal's Arts and Features Editor, Jennifer Famico-Cahill, and special guest contributor, Katja Reisling-Baldi, Associate Professor and Department Chair of Native American Studies at Humboldt State University. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you both for joining us today, especially you, Katja. This is the first time we've had a special guest contributor on our show. Let's dive right into what's on the cover this week, Jennifer.
Well, this week on the cover of the journal, we have a story actually from Cal Matters, and it is by Lawrence DeSalt, and it is called See You Again, and it comes from the title of an investigative report that was done with the Sovereign Bodies Institute as well as their partners, the Yurok tribe, on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. And I don't know if you're familiar with this already, but across the country, there is a great disparity between the numbers of missing women, girls, and Two-Spirit people in Native communities compared to the rest of the general population of the states. So this is a study that focuses on Northern California in particular, and that extends from San Francisco to the Oregon border. And the study found a number of alarming things, and a lot of this is really focused on Humboldt. We are, in a way, a kind of an epicenter, I think, for missing women, missing Native women and girls and Two-Spirit people. And in this piece, the statistics that the Cal Matters folks found or that the clearance rate, for example, for murdered women across the state is about 60%. So 60% of murdered women cases are solved by the police or some result is made. Whether or not there are convictions, et cetera, that's a separate thing. But in terms of resolving the investigation, it's about 60% clearance. But it is down to 9% for Native women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, which is crazy. It's a crazy disparity. And some of the reasons for that, I think Katja will elaborate on. But the report is really interesting, and it's available. We have links that the story will go up online. Tomorrow we'll go live, and we'll have links to the report that you can read. You can read the whole thing, and it's actually credit to Sovereign Bodies Institute and the Yurok tribe. It's an extremely readable report. And it's not like, when you're slogging through government materials for stories and you're, trying to parse the meaning in all of these numbers. It's an extremely easy to understand and heartbreakingly so report that tells you everything from, individual case stories to, general trends in law enforcement and in Native communities around California. But there's a lot of Humboldt in this. And it's really something I think everybody should get a handle on. If we're talking about justice issues and policing of late, I feel like this is a portion of that story that can't be left out. Some of the stories that are related in the Cal Matters kind of summary of that report include one Native woman, Alicia Lara, who was ruled to have died in a car accident when in fact her body was found in the passenger seat. So this is it's a bit beyond the pale, right?
Right.
That it wasn't at least further investigated, and in that report, as I was reading through it and looking at the faces of the women that are, being discussed, and the women some of whom are from here, some of whom went missing here, it was really stunning to see, and stunning to see that it could go on for so long without, a general outcry from Californians. And there are some really great people that are working on this, including There is a Chief Justice, Abby Abenati from the Yurok tribe, and she and the Sovereign Bodies Institute are doing some really fantastic work, and we're hoping to keep up with them in future to see what develops in their work on this project. But for some general background, and I think to sort of illuminate what the issue is like for Native women, I think Katja can speak to those issues.
Fantastic, Jennifer. Definitely thank you for telling us the backstory. We'll check out that Cal Matters story. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for being here with us today as our special guest. You did a guest piece called Every Number is a Person. Subtitle, Humboldt's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit People. Tell us a little bit about, what you know about how Humboldt is sort of the epicenter for our state, and our state is the epicenter for our country. About the the sort of the law enforcement, the trouble, the reason, why is this such a problematic thing for people to investigate and help these women and their families?
I think one of the things that struck me most about the report is that Humboldt County has such a high rate of missing and murdered Indigenous women that when you look at some of the things that were created as part of the report, they include like a map which shows you like a number of the cases are specifically focused in Humboldt County. When they talk about Northern California, right? Like we as Humboldt Countyans will sometimes be like, well, what do they mean by Northern California, right? Like, what does that mean? And in this case, they're really talking about our region and our area. And I think it speaks a lot to the fact that we have in this county kind of not really wanted to talk about like violence against Native peoples and Native women, especially, that we kind of still want to gloss over like our history here, but also the continued violence that happens to Indigenous peoples. One of the things that I'm really clear about in the things that I'm writing is that all of these are people and that they belong to families and they have people who love them. And I want to remember them as human beings and not numbers, and to think about the fact that their families contributed to this report. So the women, the people who are named in this report are done so because the families are working with the Sovereign Bodies Institute to really speak about their family members. And so we need to remember that and honor that that is difficult work for families to do, to share stories like this, to share details, that it gets carried with them, but that they know that this is important for people to understand. And so naming them and honoring that name is very important. And then to think about them as human beings, because we can tell you statistics, right? Like all the time. But when you start telling a single story about like a woman whose children are growing up here now in Humboldt, who will never stop looking for her, and they'll never stop trying to find information, and what that means for us as a community, and to think about how we're going to move forward from that. So I think one thing that the report is really good at doing is trying to discuss why this is an ongoing issue for Indigenous peoples. One of the main reasons today that it is an ongoing issue is because of jurisdictional issues that happen, especially in the state of California, but also throughout the United States. Right now in the United States, there are no laws that allow Native tribes to prosecute non-Native offenders who commit crimes on Native land. And so what this means is if you are a non-Native person and you are on Native land and you commit a violent crime, there is a chance that you will not be prosecuted, because that crime can only be prosecuted by the federal government, or in the case of California, by the county or state of California. We don't have the jurisdiction to do that. And this is because of a long history. I encourage people, if you want to know more, to actually read a book called The Beginning and the End of Rape. It's by Sarah Deer. And she goes through this very long history of like why they really went after our jurisdiction. And in the 2010, the Obama administration tried to update the Violence Against Women Act and the Tribal Law and Order Act to be able to say we could prosecute non-Native offenders for certain violent crimes, but it's being rolled out in a way that tribes have to have all of the infrastructure in order to do that. And that takes time and money. And we don't often get like the resources to be able to make that happen. So those are still developing things. So that's one of the big issues. We also have in California, we're what they call a public law 280 state. What this is supposed to mean is that we have co-jurisdiction with local governments. And so when it comes to law enforcement, we're supposed to have a co-jurisdiction over our tribal lands. But if we don't have a good working relationship with local law enforcement, or if local law enforcement doesn't see what's happening on Indian lands as a priority, what that means is we still can't arrest and prosecute non-Native offenders. And when you look at the numbers for Indigenous women, a majority of the crimes that are committed against Indigenous women are done by non-Native offenders. So that means we can't arrest them. And then you look at the statistics and it shows that like 52% of violent crimes that are committed on reservations often go unprosecuted. And so there is this vacuum that has been created. And I know that people have done research into showing that they've gone on to like deep, like Reddit, like subreddit boards, and they've been looking at people talking, and people share this information as this is a vulnerable population and you have a good chance of getting away with things that are happening. And so you see that they've created this, and then the federal government has never really done anything to fix it. They've never like put in the fixes that need to happen. And so who's left vulnerable but Indigenous women, Indigenous peoples? They've also tied this violence against Indigenous peoples, especially with regard to like sex trafficking, sexual assault, and sexual violence, to extractive industries. And what they've said is when you look at where extractive industries are located, they tend to be located next to tribal lands. And because of that, what that means, and they're primarily talking, like the studies that they've done have really looked at the oil extraction industry and pipelines, but they've also looked at the mining industry. And they're starting really to look very heavily at the cannabis industry. And they're saying what you're creating is a group of people that are like transient populations. They're really not from here. They're coming into the area. They usually are like an influx where they're coming for a certain period of time. They're doing an industry that extracts from the land. And then you see massive increases in sex trafficking, sexual assault, and sexual violence while they are there. And there's not a lot of regulation of that. And they create this moment where that sort of increases, and it tends to be near tribal lands that these things are happening. And so in Humboldt County, we have to sort of reckon with the idea of we are really trying to look at the cannabis industry as an economic industry, but it brings with it a lot of really big issues when it comes to what happens with the people that are around there, what happens to the lands. And we know from anecdotal evidence, but also studies, that it does increase like sexual violence, especially against Indigenous women in this community. And this is a continuation of extractive industries that we've had in Humboldt County for hundreds of years.
So Kutcha, thank you so much. In your article, your tone, I think, is really instructive, and it helps break through people. They might, like you said, people don't like to talk about this, but there are great resources in there for learning and education. There's also a list of sort of what we can do, what next steps the community can take to address some of these problems that you outlined about jurisdiction and extractive industries, unique characteristics. In our last couple of minutes, is there anything you want to tell people now about sort of where they can go or what we can do besides going into your story and reading it and finding them for ourselves?
I mean, I would really encourage people to read both of the stories and to look up the resources and to read the report. I mean, I think one thing is like really look at the report for yourself. But the biggest thing I will say is we are already doing this work as Indigenous peoples throughout this region. And what we're fortunate enough in Humboldt County to have is a significant population of Native peoples. So while the population of Native peoples in California amounts to about like 1.7% of the total population, in Humboldt County, we're 6 to 7% of the population. And in Del Norte, we're like 10 to 11% of the population. So we are significant. And I think what that means is we have a lot of organizations in Humboldt County that are doing work with tribal youth, tribal peoples, with issues of like policy, with introducing like how we're going to protect our land and environment and our future generations. And I would highly encourage people to support those organizations like Two Feathers, Native American Family Services, the Northern California Indian Development Council, the Native Women's Collective, the Native Cultures Fund, the Seventh Generation Fund. Like those are the people that are doing this work. And to support the Sovereign Bodies Institute and find ways that you can help them with their work. I always tell people, even if it's just donating $5, that's enough to show that people care about this issue. And that is sometimes enough to sustain us as we're doing this work on the ground, to move forward with what we want to do in our county to make it a safer place for everyone.
Fantastic. We have a responsibility to educate ourselves and give resources, provide resources where we can, give our time, energy, thought, goodwill. Thank you, Katja, so much. Jennifer, any last thoughts before we wrap up for today?
There's plenty more in the paper to read, but you go grab it, get it online. It'll all be online on Thursday.
Fantastic. Katja, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us here today. That's just about do it for this week. North Coast Journal is on newsstands now. Find them online. Pick one up. Stay informed. Take care till next time.